Hello and welcome to our debut review on Dragon Ball Daima, kicking off with the episode Conspiracy. And we start this review, as we always do with these reviews, by talking about the positives. And we start out with the headline positives. I thought the animation in this episode was amazing. I loved the mysticism of everything that we saw, and I loved the world building. And in time-honoured Holes Variety Back tradition, it's time to eliminate any pretense and grasp the thistle and just say that I bloody loved this one. This was a birthday treat and then some. I am just blown away by just about every single aspect of this episode, especially with the animation. It goes without saying that the animation in this episode goes above and beyond almost everything that we saw in Super, especially early on. Now, in fairness, I never had that much of an issue with the animation in the early part of Super, and that might be because of growing up with cheap Saturday morning cartoons that kind of maybe a little bit more immune to that kind of stuff, but still, there is a cinematic quality to everything that we see on screen from start to finish, with nothing really feeling out of place or undercooked to me. There's a couple of moments where you could make the argument that it is, but it feels as if it is undercooked. It's there for very deliberate stylistic reasons, and it's just such a small part in the greater whole that it really is hard to take much criticism or to be that critical of it. It's even hard to really say that this is cinematic quality, because what we're seeing here is just so consistently brilliant, it's almost dizzying. The colour, the composition, the cinematography of almost every single shot was just... it was brilliant. It's every bit as amazing as what we've seen in all the trailers and teaser imagery up until this moment. I know that for a lot of people they're a little bit nervous about all of it, particularly with a couple of CG shots here and there, but I have to say that everything in this has been well integrated, even those CG moments, as they are done in ways for characters and entities that are mystical and uncanny, so having them look a little bit mystical and uncanny with the CG animation works for me. I will admit that using it on Shenron doesn't really work for me, but still, it's all brilliant and amazing. From the early recreations of the Boo arc to everything thereafter, everything we see here has this level of flair and personality that feels like this perfect translation of the expressiveness of Toriyama's work to an animated form in probably, I think, the best way that we've seen. This is, for me, probably pound for pound the best animated Dragon Ball thing I've ever seen on television. It's able to balance being expressive and being rich with personality, and yet still having the composure and the build of it without it getting too cartoony. It doesn't feel like we're watching the Saturday morning cartoon version of Dragon Ball that regrettably parts of Super ended up feeling. And whilst these are moments that are cartoonish, they are cartoonish in a way which does feel consistent with not just the feel of everything else within this episode, but with the wider canon of the animation of Dragon Ball in the past 40 years or so. It is almost impossible to describe just how good this looks. Of course, if you're watching this review, you will have seen the episode itself, so you know how good it looks, but the best analogy that I can come to think of as to how great all this looks is simply that they hit the bullseye. Everything looks and acts and is animated exactly like it needs to be, without anything overreaching or underperforming. There's never a moment where it feels as though they're playing their hand too much and being too animated or being too stylistic for the sake of being stylistic. Everything that is done here just feels brilliant, and it all ends up feeling like this isn't just, oh, here's more Dragon Ball. This feels like an evolution, a progression, the next logical step as to where this series should be going and how it should be looking. And whilst we don't see that much action in this episode, what little that we do see has impact, and regrettably that is something that has been sorely lacking for me for the majority of Dragon Ball, especially Super, but I'm one of those people that genuinely feels that the best action, the best fight sequence that we've had in the series of Dragon Ball was in original Dragon Ball, and everything thereafter I feel got a little bit too it got a little bit too stylistic for its own good, and some of the impact and some of just the weight of the fighting started to lose something, apart from the odd shot and the odd punch and kick here and there, and it was all too often just people flicking around the battlefield in that little flicky way that they do in anime, and a bunch of with people throwing their arms about. But just that moment with Majin, Vegeta and Goku at the World Tournament Arena, when just the little moment they have when the two of them are just fighting one another in the way that they do so, had so much weight to it, it felt astonishing. Again, it's not just people flicking about and launching key beams here, there and everywhere. Sure, that stuff might come later, but there's still this feeling of showing a battle, showing a fight, showing people actually in combat with one another, rather than thinking of, okay, we need to do this fight and then we also need to do all these other things, so let's just keep to the key moments and the key impacts here and there. Every element of the fights that we see of them, what little that there is, in fairness, is good and has this great flair and feel to it. And all of this ends up leaving me feeling of, oh my god, how the hell do we go back to Super after this? Oh, I'm sure that if they ever come back to Super in an animated form, it'll probably look more or less as good as this. But from what we can see in this episode, this whole Daima thing is going to be set just before Super in terms of timeline, unless they end up retconning Super in some regard, which I don't think that they will do. But it's going to be really weird going from all this cinema quality animation to all of a sudden getting what you saw in those early parts of Dragon Ball Super. Just on the visuals alone, there is this rich creativity behind everything. One which gives it such a personality and energy that it stands out and has this great flair and feel to it. It feels new yet familiar. It is fresh, but it also at the same time feels like it's always been there, and that helps to add to the mystical tone of everything in this episode. This episode does not feel like business as usual. It feels as though we are stepping into this new realm, this new interesting world, one which has a wealth of possibilities of countless adventures, even if this demon realm may never be explored much further than this singular season. But with all that said, we get this massive sense of just this grand spirit of adventure before Goku and his friends have even had lunch. Even before that happens, it already feels as though we've gone on this adventure in the first 15 minutes of this episode, which is more than GT ever managed, more than Super ever managed, and more than most of Dragon Ball Z ever managed. And yet, whilst we have this spirit of adventure, whilst we are seeing new things, it feels as though they're being done in a way which builds out the world more so than, oh hey, here's this cool thing you know, but it's the demon version of it. The look and feel of the demon realm has this spirit to it and this presence that is almost hard to comprehend, but it feels tangible. Like I say, it feels as though it's something that's always been there and always been part of this world and this series, with the various quirks that make it up that we have introduced here just being. There are no major lore dumps with when something is brought into the series and then there's just this massive explanation, this almost ream of text being to describe what it is and explain what it is. As soon as something is brought up, we move along from that. Sure, it may be explained later on, ideally gradually with that information being fed out to us rather than just being one great big exposition dump, but everything we see here is just treated as being. Everything is just treated as just being a matter of fact for this world, and yet it's treated as a matter of fact for this world in a way in which we can understand. There's nothing here that feels so esoteric that we can't comprehend it. It's stuff that is obvious what it is on first glance, yet there's still room to explore it and to go further with it. The fact that King Goma, or whatever his name is next in line for the throne is just a fact. The fact that his attendants are siblings of the Supreme Kai is just a fact. The fact that there is a Namekian in the demon realm is just a fact. There is no dramatic music sting, there is no kind of big sharp camera shot whenever these things are brought up. Again, there's no big lore dumps whenever these things are brought in. Not even when the implication that Namekians come from the demon realm is brought up. Like, this is all treated as just being a matter of fact, yet it's still presented in such a way as these are things that will no doubt be explored and discussed over the course of this season or so. This is Toriyama and his team just setting out the stall and signposting all the things that are going to come into play over the next few episodes or so without it feeling heavy-handed. This is all stuff that is just... It's the kind of thing that you know that in the next hour or two there's going to be a wealth of videos on this, discussing the lore implications of it and theorising about the various elements of it. And it's all stuff that will, as of the course of the next few episodes and the course of this season, be explored to some degree or another. And no doubt in the next episode and the episode of that, there'll be more of this setting the stall and saying these are the things we're going to look at over the next 20 or so episodes. And I really do like that. Again, the fact that these things are just treated as being, the fact that these things are just treated as being elements of this world without a massive lore dump, without a massive ream of text to explain it all, so that we ourselves and an audience can try and understand it and comprehend it and theorise it on our own, is something I greatly appreciate. This is a episode that treats its audience with respect, even though there's going to be people watching this of all age groups, young, old, people that have been watching this series for 40 years or more. Well, maybe not 40 years or more, but you get the idea. Like, the audience is treated with a level of respect, even though there's going to be a lot of people of different ages and different comprehensions watching this. And the fact that the Demon Realm is treated as just normal to the characters there really helps make it feel like a solid, tangible place. Nothing is explained to them in that weird way that sometimes you get in science fiction and fantasy shows. You know, even though these characters have grown up in this world and this world hasn't changed really in any great regard for God knows how long, there is no moment where they just go, "Ugh, what's that?" Even though they would know what that is because they live next to that thing day in, day out for the past God knows how many centuries or what have you. Not even the big Thomas the Tank Engine fish rocket thing really gets explained, but we can kind of get an idea as to what it is by just how it is and how it reacts and how people react to it. Not everything needs to be explained. Some things are just implied, and maybe in time goes by we'll see how these things are explained and develop as we progress with all of this. I will admit that doing this review just feels really strange to me, because so much of it ends up coming down to just the vibes that I get from it, which is really difficult to really discuss in the context of any kind of criticism or any kind of review, because it is something, a feeling that is just so intangible, so effervescent, so personal, that it feels as though it's trying to, as I've mentioned in previous reviews, it's like comprehending the vastness of the universe and then condensing all that information onto something you can fit on the back of a postage stamp. However, it makes it all feel just so fresh, so much that is so new. It ends up making it feel as though, like I've said previously, that this is a real place in this world, that it has always been there, and it doesn't just exist because the writer thought, oh, it would be neat if we did this. It feels like it's always been there, just in the corner, just in the shadows, just in the periphery, and now this is the first time that we're properly getting into it. Along that same kind of thought process, let's talk about the world building, and yes, the Demon Realm and everything that makes up of it is the meat of the world building of this episode. Like I say, and as is perfectly obvious to anyone that knows anything about this series, this is the first time that we're getting a proper deep dive into the Demon Realm, particularly as far as the main canon is concerned. I'm sure that in some other video game it has been explored, maybe the Dragon Ball Hero game, maybe the Dragon Ball Online thing, but this is the first time in the main timeline and in the main continuity, as canon as all this may end up being, that we're really getting into the meat of all of this. And it ends up creating this world where just the presentation of certain elements gives you just a feeling of just the importance of them, the legacy of them, the feel of them, and I just find that brilliant. Just something fantastic to see. And again, it's all done without, oh, this is what this thing is, it was made dun 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 dun. The only thing that we really get anything of a deep dive into the history on is the stuff with the helmet of the third evil eye or whatever it is, which, yeah, that's going to be something that's going to come into play deep there later on, but aside from that, everything's just treated as fact and is stuff that will be explained in greater detail later on. In the post-Boo arc scenes that we get confirmation of certain plot holes from the Z era. Why Goku and Vegeta defuse, how Supreme Kai and Kibito defuse. The explanation being that, yes, it really was, as one of the dubs said, bad air. More specifically, a weird gas that exists within Majin Buu. Like, we have the explanation now. And also why Gotenks and Trunks remain short for so long in Super despite their age. Yes, many of these things have been covered in Super and have been heavily hinted at in the Dragon Ball Super superhero movie. But it is interesting to hear this stuff from the horse's mouth, so to speak. To be honest, there is going to be some complaining about all of these things, particularly when we go into the Patara earrings. I can hear that being or I can imagine that being the thing that some people are going to take the greatest umbrage with all of this. Though I'm sure that the most of the complaints will be the absence of Gohan and why he isn't there. Look, this is episode 1. I'd be shocked if they went the entirety of this 20 episode run of just shrugging their shoulders and going, oh, he's just off studying. Oh, he's just studying, he's looking at his insects, he's looking at his beetles or something along those lines. I'd be shocked if they went down that path. But you never know. Like, honestly, I thought they were going to reveal that he was up on the lookout doing some training and then something would happen to get him locked away, and as such, that's why he's not been seen thus far. Of course, there's always the possibility that the Dr. Demon Kai lady, who's the sibling of the Supreme Kai, might have kidnapped him for some darker ends. We'll soon see about that. One more little quick thing as far as the positives are concerned. I liked the title for this episode. Yes, it is just called Conspiracy, but look, I will admit I'm not a fan of the title, the titles of a lot of the Dragon Ball episodes, the original titles for them. Yes, the whole thing of the Ocean dub and the early Funimation dub having titles like the Darkness, the End, Climax, the Battle, 2 enter, 1 dies, and all that kind of stuff might have leaned a little bit too much, but you know, it was shortened to the point. When you get some of them, it just feels like just this word salad of just random thoughts and phrases. Just having a simple conspiracy works well, and I am fine with that. And with all that said, let us move on to the negatives. And this is going to sound strange, and as I will admit that this is a bit of a nitpick, and I will also admit that it's very hard for me to find fault with this because I was just beaming, smiling from start to finish with this. I really did love it. But if there is one negative here, I would say is that I have a bit of an issue with the fact that so much of the early act of this episode, the opening act of this episode, was just a potted history of the Boo arc. I get why it's there. It sets when we are in terms of the timeline. It is done fantastically well, as I've said and will continue to say. It also introduces the Demon Realm's view on things, their opinion, their take on the events that are unfolding. But it is almost half the episode. Whereas when this stuff was covered in Dragon Ball Super, it was just done as a last time on Dragon Ball Z kind of thing, which I feel is a lot more to the point. Though with that said, it's really stupid, I will admit, to criticise its involvement in it because of just how good it is. It's like complaining that the strawberries you're eating taste very strawberry-y. With all that said, let us get into the overview and just say that, yeah, without a single shadow of a doubt, I loved every single moment of this episode from start to finish. That little bit that we get towards the start of the episode, which just explains who Goku is amazing, it's brilliant. That's how they should have done it in the Dragon Ball Broly movie. Not the weird little montage thing that they did. No, do it like this, like in this episode, and it would have been brilliant. But just seeing the flashback, just seeing how it all went by and how we got to this point in the story, I loved it. I genuinely did, and it ended up giving this feel of just, yes, Dragon Ball is back. The show that you enjoyed really is back. I will admit, and just to put my hands up, I was never a big fan of Super. I'm not going to say which I prefer over it and GT, but I really did love this particular episode. I loved every single moment of it, and I'm really excited to see what they end up doing with this in the coming weeks and months. I am not someone who has ever really dedicated themselves to watching the subtitled version. I've never been a big fan of the voice acting in it, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it for what it was. It never felt distracting or out of place, which make of that what you will, but I really did enjoy this one. I loved it from start to finish, but let me know what you thought about it down in the comment section down below. There's not going to be a comment corner this week, because this is the first time I'm actually talking about Dragon Ball Daima, and outside of the odd movie here and there, I've not really talked about it, so there's no point me doing any comic corner from that, particularly bear in mind we're talking about stuff from about a couple of years back. But anyway, let me know what you think. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!